go. So just as a starter, thanks everybody for being here. Today you see what it is about. So it's about targeting the winning features, sharpening a teacher-focused software prototype with jobs to be done. And a lot of what is going to be talked about today is going to be explained and talked through by Anna. So Anna, thank you so much for being here and doing this. I'm really excited to see your case, and I think we can dive right in. Before we do this, a little bit about ourselves, because I think there are some new faces, there's some familiar faces, but also some new faces.
Yes, we are from Vendbridge. Vendbridge is a specialized firm, and what we really do is we focus innovation ideas on the customer. We help teams, innovators, companies to pick the right ideas, and of course the right ideas in a customer-focused way, so that they can grow and realize innovation projects. We work in different modes. You see that on the left side. Companies working with us is either they get turnkey projects where we do most of the things with the client team, or we do job to be done project coaching, always on real projects, real questions. This presentation, Anna will talk about a coaching project. We coached a team of 10, 15 people across the Atlantic, or we do injection workshops. What is really driving us is we want to have meaningful innovation, useful innovation. We want to have consistent customer first philosophy that drives everything. If there is no customer first, then there is no added value or little chance of added value. And we work very concrete and actionable. For us, important is the implementation. We want to make it happen. And we get a lot of fun when we walk through for example, the shelves, and we see products where we were involved, or online when we see it is happening. Our clients are corporates on the one hand, and which is not here on the slide, tech startups. We work a lot with the startups as well, where we apply the job to be done philosophy, and we drive that, of course, in a very much more lean and agile way. Yeah, this is all about Vendbridge. And I would like to hand over the mic to Anna, as she will present herself. Anna.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you happen to be in the world. I'm Anna Hughes. I am Director of User Experience Research at Promethean. For those of you who are not familiar with Promethean, we are a company that makes hardware. We make very large format interactive touchscreens for classrooms, as well as software that teachers use to help them take advantage of the interactive nature of those large format touchscreens. So if you want to go to the next slide, Jan. So towards the end of last year, we completed a design sprint where we had some ideas and some hypotheses based on qualitative research that we had completed. And the design sprint resulted in a prototype. We reviewed that prototype with some teachers, and we got generally very positive feedback, but we had so many ideas, if you want to move on. And we just really needed to better understand which of these ideas or features would be valuable enough to get a teacher to sort of adopt these new products, and for administrators to want to purchase. So I'm a big fan of Clayton Christensen. I'm sure that all of you in the Jobs to be Done are also fans of his. So as I was thinking about how we could go about really dialing in on where the true value of this prototype is, I became more and more convinced that Jobs to be Done would be a great way to kind of drive that value out and kind of figure out where we could get the most, or what would be most valuable for teachers. But I didn't want to just hand this off to an agency or hire a consultant to do the work for us. I really wanted to grow my skills as a researcher, and I wanted the opportunity for those on my team and some of our stakeholder teams like the design team and the product team to understand and also grow their skills around the jobs to be done methodology. So it was hard to find the right partner. I did many winding sort of searches on everywhere from Slack channels and communities to Google searches. I interviewed a number of agencies. But when I connected with Jan for the first time and we started to talk about the project, and Jan talked about the coaching practice that Vendbridge has. I got really convinced very quickly that this was going to be the right partner for us. And it was a risk. There were several, I think, members of the Promethean team who were a little bit skeptical. This was a brand new sort of way of doing things at Promethean. So fortunately, we picked the right partner. The project was a huge success. So we'll tell you about it a little bit more.
I'm very glad you found us. So we'll get a little bit deeper into this. Exactly, it was a coaching project. So we'll also show kind of what the coaching aspect is. But so this is exactly as Anya, you explained it, is how you basically approached us, and you had a prototype ready for teachers, which had a certain spin or a certain idea of where it should go, but there were so many different ideas out there. And it was very clear, this uncertainty whether teachers will be willing to pay. I mean, that's kind of a very key question. Should we really put in all the money in the development if in the end the value proposition isn't where it should be? So these two problems that you confronted us with, so we have so many ideas to pick from, and we're uncertain if they want to pay. For us, kind of the answers, or how we would find an answer, is what we would call pain matching and the value proposition. So we will get into this, what that means and how we get there. But pain matching basically is how we select the winning ideas, and the value proposition is our own canvas that we apply to find really something that resonates with teachers. So what is the spin that we need to find for a solution so that it resonates with teachers? There is a question by Wolfram. I think it will be good if we pick it up right now.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I just thought you collect and we discuss it afterwards. So shall we interrupt your presentation or not?
Please feel free. No, I think it's better if you jump in at the moment.
Okay, okay, sorry. Yeah, fine. So Anna, you mentioned, so I feel with you. You mentioned that you had this new approach and you wanted to do it and you are convinced. But your colleagues not so new. Will this be successful? So how did you convince them to start with this approach? I mean, later it turned out it was successful and good, and everyone says, oh, that's cool, but you needed to start, and before they were not convinced. So how did you do this?
Yeah, it was, I would call it an iterative approach. First I had to do a little education internally about kind of jobs to be done generally, and Clayton Christensen. And I think the fact that there is a body of research out there, and there are very clear cases of people applying this and it being very successful at helping them innovate. So there was a little of that. And then there was, I spent a lot of time with individual stakeholders, talking with them about, what is it that you would like to get out of this research project? What very specific questions what questions do we have to answer in order for you to feel like this project is a success? And then sort of based on those kind of internal stakeholder interviews, if you will, coming back and saying, okay, this is how this methodology is going to address your questions. I think the quantitative aspect was also very interesting for us. I was just calculating out last night, we've literally done thousands of hours of interviews with teachers over the last couple of years and IT administrators. But the idea of really quantifying things and having a body of data, I think really kind of cemented it. And then frankly, you know, I have to give kudos to my manager, Stephanie, who's I don't think is on this call, but in the end, you know, it kind of came down to our trust in each other. You know, she at some point just had to say, okay, listen, I trust you. I hired you to do this job, and I have to trust that you're going to do the right thing. So, yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I remember this quite well. So, I mean, I think we'll get to this. So the quantitative part, I think, was where really kind of the coin dropped, I felt like, but okay, we'll get to this in a moment. So we've talked about this, we've talked about jobs to be done, we've talked about interviews and qualitative. Now, what is the process actually to get here? So there is problems, there is some answers that are just, I mean, 4 words, pain, magic, and value proposition, but how do we get there? What is actually the process? We call this the CFI process. It's a process that we have developed and refined over the past 15 years. CFI stands for Customer Focused Innovation, and it's a way to apply jobs to be done. For us, jobs to be done, we will get into this, is a way of thinking that really connects with how customers actually think, and we'll show in a minute what that means. First of all, there is a very important kind of 4-step process that we have to go through in order to get to this pain matching here on the very right and the value proposition design. And I mentioned this, so we started, I mean, you started collecting different questions that were in there in the business that people had that they want to get an answer to. And these are the questions that we need to know and understand in the phase where we say it's about framing. So framing is three things, basically. It's understanding the exact business intention. So exactly what are the questions that you want answers to? And then, of course, it can always be that jobs to be done isn't the right answer. But here it was very clear. I mean, these 2 questions, which idea and will teachers be willing to pay, are perfect questions in a sense for jobs to be done. That's the business intention. Second one is the target group. In this case, that was very clear. So it's about teachers in the US. And third is what we call the jobs to be done hierarchy. So that's a hypothesis on what we believe the job looks like. And we'll show in a minute what that means. Once we have this, once we have a good frame, and that's a really important step, we go into what we call discovery. So discovery is really understanding teachers, in this case, in a very detailed and very concrete way. First half, where we say job metrics, and we will show some examples of these, is qualitative interviews. Talking to teachers, I think it was about 14 or so, where we talk to teachers really in depth, 1 hour interviews in a jobs to be done way. And that means in a solution-free way, really focused on their needs. And then the second part of Discover is what Anna has already mentioned. So the quantitative part, where we get to a value map, where teachers tell us which of the needs that we've discovered in the qualitative part are really relevant, which are important and which are unsolved. We will show a couple of them in a minute as a result. Now, once we have those 2 steps, which are all solution-free, they're all just about the needs, just about understanding the teacher needs, we add 2 steps where we go again into the solution space. So where we take the results that we have and use them to guide and sharpen the solutions that we have. One of these in Spin is exactly the pain matching workshop, and we will show in a minute how that works. And the second one is then developing the value proposition that will guide then also, or can guide the development really and keep it in a customer focused way. So now for those that are new to it, what is jobs to be done? You've heard this quote. It has become more and more popular, but it kind of really captures the essence of what jobs to be done is about. So for us, as we mentioned, jobs to be done is a way of thinking. This quote, "People don't want to drill, they want a hole in the wall," by Ted Levitt, encapsulates that way of thinking perfectly. What does it mean? It means if you want to understand your customer, you have to shift away from the solution first, being the drill, to what they want to achieve in the end with it. And that here, the hole in the wall. Of course, we can have a very nice debate if they really want a hole in the wall or not. But the basic logic is shift away from don't think about the drill, don't talk about the drill, but try to understand what customers want to achieve. What is the job that they want to get done, i.e. the hole in the wall, and then work backwards to the solution from there. So that for us is the key of jobs to be done, and CFI is the process of how we apply it. Now, how does this look like? How does the hierarchy actually look like? How do we start this framing phase? And I will hand over to Beat.
Yeah, the hierarchy is a tool that we have developed and use systematically now. We use it as a hypothesis. We realized in many projects that we did, that we always tried to structure, and we saw people, when jobs to be done became popular, we saw companies and people of teams getting lost in this concept. They were inspired by jobs to be done. They thought, wow, this is a great way of thinking, which it is. But then we see the teams looking for jobs, and jobs can be on a higher level and it can be on a lower level. It can be very detailed jobs, or it can be very high up. And we thought, well, let's create a pyramid, a hierarchy of jobs, and organize all these jobs. There is, on the higher level, we call this is the why you're doing something. And on the lower level, we call it the how, the lower how. The lower how goes very close to a journey, customer journey, but it's not a solution journey, it's really a need journey. It's what do people try to get done on a lower level in the current way of doing it. So this is the really a tool to calibrate, to say, how high do we want to go and how low do we want to go? There's no right answer or wrong answer. It's really, first of all, linked to the business question. That's very important. The business question can be broader, higher, or it can be more narrow. It is very factual. Actually, it looks very simple. In the Promethean case, it was a very simple job to teach students at the age of 6 to 12. So it's very simple. There are no qualifiers in here. A job statement should not have a qualifier. So it should not say to teach efficiently, or to teach when you plan the week quickly. That should not be in there. It should be very factual description of a job. And then we start to discuss. We do brainstorming. And in 10 minutes, basically, you have mapped out a lot of jobs, and then we start to organizing it. We need this as a hypothesis to go into exploration, qualitative interview, and we need to have it to organize our thoughts and to organize our findings. That's the job hierarchy.
Before you move on, Jan, I just wanted to, if I could just jump in here. I think what Bea sort of touched on here is really important, because this is where I was sort of floundering when I went looking for a partner to help us with this. Because if you just go and say, I want to prepare children for life, and then you try and call that a job, and then you start trying to pick that apart, you could spend the rest of your life trying to understand everything, right, that goes into that. And yet, I like that level of where to focus our inquiry here was so critical. And that's, it's one of the huge values that we got out of this project, was having a partner to help us sort of, as Bea said, first of all, organize our thinking, and then dial into what's the altitude, what's really the right place for us to focus our attention.
Yeah, I remember quite well, there was a lot of discussion about, is the focus job to deliver a lesson, or is it to teach? Like, and depending on whatever altitude you choose, the hierarchy looks different. But it gives you, that's the purpose of the hierarchy. It gives you a tool to think this through, to talk this through in a systematic way, and you're quite quick about this.
Yes, so it gives a lot of clarity. It is also a tough decision. Once we freeze this, before we go into the interview, we take it almost like as a given. Then we go into the interviews, and in the first couple of interviews, we verify, are we right or not? We say a lot in our work, trust the process. This is just a hypothesis. We can endlessly discuss this, and we lose time, but we don't want to lose time. We want to focus on the right ideas, and that's why we fix this. We go into interviews, and then we hear immediately from the users, the customers, what is right and what is wrong. They use different words. They use different sequences. They add in steps, or they look at a step and say, I've never done this. I don't know what it means. And this is very helpful. And after 3-4 interviews, it becomes much more stable. It becomes real. Of course, some users call it differently, but then we really freeze it. And that's the scope of the discussion. Now, in these interviews, we don't look for further jobs. Of course, we collect them, but what we really look for is job metrics. The job metric makes jobs to be done powerful. It's this. You might know outcome-driven innovation, or ODI. It's the outcomes that make this methodology strong. You've read, many of you have read maybe Clayton Christensen. He calls it hiring criteria. What is the criteria people use to hire a solution to get a job done? And we call it job metrics. So it's really the metrics that users apply when they try to get a job done, when they try to achieve a whole. And so we have techniques, questioning techniques to drill this out, to pull this out. You have two examples to remember all the admin tasks that come up during the week. This was mentioned by a teacher. Yeah, on Sunday afternoon, when I prepare the week, when I plan the week, I have to remember what are the admin tasks. And I have to remember all the tasks, not just one or two and forget other ones. So another way to phrase this would be never forget, or never forget an admin task coming up in the next week. Probably that was also the way it was written. Then another one, develop a lesson plan in the fewest steps as possible. The fewest steps as possible is really the metric. It's about steps that a teacher does when she is preparing the week, when she's preparing a lesson. She has to do a certain amount of steps, and that's the unit in the metric. So when I said before, factual description of the job, now of course we have the qualifiers in there, and that's these metrics. In total, when we do a round of interviews with 10 to 20 people, we get 100 to 200 of these metrics easily. Yeah. And it's really surprising. Each of these steps behind has 10, 15 of these metrics, and then you have 10 steps and easily have 100. But this is really granular. These are the things that make users tick. And these are the things that then can be implemented in innovation, or can be put into communication. Concrete wins over abstract, and that's what we're looking for. I would like to hand over to Anna, because she was in the interviews. She experienced that, and she went also through the pain of it.
Yeah. So, it's learning this methodology and then talking about it, sort of in the abstract is one thing, and then actually applying it, I think, was a little terrifying the first time. But, the process was actually really good. And what I liked about it is that it was so immediately relevant, right? We weren't sort of coming up with made up questions and then interviewing each other about pretend situations. This is a real product. We're determining if we're going to make real engineering investments in building this product. And so, it was very anchored in reality. So, kind of the process was, we had some training. Jan and Beat kind of helped us understand what to listen for in these interviews. And then the first interview, Jan did, and we observed, and the process was that we tried to write down as many of these job metrics as we heard. It was very challenging at first. Like, you have this instinct to try and write everything down. And then at some point, and Jan is obviously very experienced and very adept at this. But at some point, the interviewer pulls something out and says, oh, so what I hear you saying is that when you are planning a lesson, it's really important that you can do it in the fewest possible steps. And then the teacher says, yes, that's right. Or it's actually not about the number of steps. It's actually about the amount of time it takes or something like that, right? And once you kind of hear it a couple of times, you start honing in on, oh, this feels like we're on the path of something that is a job to be, or an outcome, a desired outcome that I have for this step in the process. And so then it was our turn. So I did the next one, and we had a debrief afterwards with Jan and Bea. It was great. They're like, hey, I noticed here you could have drilled a little harder, or there you did a great job of extracting out the job. And so it was kind of this rotating thing. Like I did one, a member of my team did one, we did, Jan did another one. And I think, doing like it for me and for my team, the real learning was that hands-on kind of doing it in kind of a supported way, and then getting the expert feedback afterwards. There's the saying about, it takes 10,000 hours to master a craft, but if you're doing it incorrectly for 10,000 hours, you're never going to be a master at it, right? So I think what was wonderful about this was that we could practice. We got the very direct and immediate feedback of, there was a spot where I wish you would have taken that a little further, or great job there. So I think tremendous value for our team in terms of walking away not only confident about sort of the immediate research outcome, but also very confident that we know how to apply this next time.
That's very nice. So I'm sorry, do you want to say anything?
No, go ahead.
Okay. No, well, I just want to, this is really where we also feel like why we do coaching always on a concrete business case. There's no dry runs. We want to get value from each of those interviews. And as you mentioned, you can do these artificial interviews, but you don't really learn anything. And I think that is really important to us as well. Really have the concrete case and work on that one and have impact every time we do something with you. Okay.
There's a question, Jan.
Sure.
There's a question. Scott asked, were all the interviews via Zoom or were there some in person? This is a very interesting question. They were all on Zoom. We moved to Zoom, and during COVID, of course, and what we found out is that the people are more open on Zoom or on Google Hangout than face to face, which basically challenged our own thinking from before. But we get more openness on Zoom, the way we do the interviews, and today we do everything remote. Of course, we don't do observations of how they do it, ethnographical things. You can't do. You have to see it. But even then, we have a confidence that we get a lot out of this if we do it really, really well structured.
And then there was just the logistics of, I'm in Seattle, our team in the US is scattered across Seattle and Baltimore and Georgia. And obviously our friends at Vendbridge are in Switzerland.
There's a little bit of a time difference there.
Yeah, and location. So yeah.
Okay, so shall we move on? So this was interviewing. We dig in deep. Okay, there's a question by Francisco. Francisco, do you want to ask it before we move on? Okay, so he's asking what he thinks is the most frequent mistake in applying this methodology. Well, I think one was mentioned in the very beginning by Anna. So getting lost in 1,000 different jobs that are not helpful. So being way too abstract. And then the second one, I think, is not really grasping the power of the concept of job metrics, of really digging this additional step further and being much more concrete. Where we tend to see a lot of teams that are kind of used to asking what's important to people, but then they struggle to ask what is really difficult, what is a challenge, what is a pain point, what is a problem. So and knowing what you were looking for, having those job metrics is really, really helpful. And I believe kind of the biggest mistake that many do is just focusing on jobs and not really looking for criteria of success. So not really thinking about those job metrics. Okay. Oh, sorry, do you want to say something, Anna? Or?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and I think too, like as an interviewer and as someone who was learning the methodology, it was, I think as an interviewer, at least for me, I don't want to feel like I had this perception that I was pestering people if I kept sort of drilling down a little deeper, a little deeper, a little deeper, that people were going to get annoyed with me. And I think there's some skill in asking questions in ways that don't feel like you're pestering somebody and going, well, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? So there is some skill there, but I think it's also sort of overcoming this reluctance to want to go deep, because people are perfectly happy to go deep. I mean, we had teachers tell us like, oh my God, I never get to talk about lesson planning. Like, this is really important part of my job and I never get to talk about it. Like, he was thrilled that somebody was interested enough to want to go deep with him. So yeah, that's another thing I think, is that you kind of want to leave it at the surface because it feels more polite or more comfortable or something.
Yeah, I agree. But people like to talk about themselves. So, okay, interviewing, and then we really look for these job metrics. And we also, there's a lot of the coaching goes into how do you write those exactly? How do you actually formulate those? How do you look for them in the interview itself? We dug out, as Beat mentioned, I think something around 200, but you have to reduce this. You can never put that into a survey, because what you have now is just a list of 200 very concrete, basically teacher needs, which in itself is very valuable. I mean, you rarely have needs on this level of concreteness, but you don't know the relevance. So what you want to do, and what we did in this project, is put them in a quantitative survey to find out which of them are really, really important and which of them are not satisfied yet. So where do teachers struggle, basically? And we would put 51 into a survey and let, I think, 166 teachers rated our survey. And what we'll see now in a minute is the output of that survey, the result of that survey. And the result of that survey is what we call a value map. So it shows the biggest opportunities. Each of those dots that you see here on the map is one of those 51 job metrics. So you have to imagine in a questionnaire, we ask teachers for each of those 51, how important is it to them? And then in a second run, how satisfied are they currently with the solutions that they have with that job metric? How satisfied are they? How well can they achieve this job metric? And what you get is then a map like this, where on the bottom is importance and up and down is fulfillment. And you can map each of those metrics and really see where are the ones, basically on the very bottom right, which of these are very, very important, but not yet fulfilled. That for us is the opportunity space to focus on. And there is some that are on the very left. So very few people said that that is important. So that's stuff you can ignore. So this helps you really to focus and to know which of these 51 needs in that whole hierarchy which of them are really relevant. And we'll show in a minute, on the next slide, basically, what some of those were.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but some of the things that popped out here, into this opportunity space, or the kind of pain points, it was so helpful for us to see on a really concrete quantitative scale. These are the things that teachers really care about. Like, we had some hypotheses, but what was so helpful for our team was to concretely see that teachers say, yes, it's student attention and engagement is so important. And yet I don't have great ways to do that. Like, I don't have great tools today to help me with that. Like when we get interrupted by a technical issue, when some other kind of interruption has happened, and having these really concretely spelled out, now we can go back to our prototype and we can say, oh, okay, all right, so of all of these, 50 features, which are the ones, now we can start to say, which are the ones that are going to help us accomplish this task that is really important and doesn't have a great answer today.
Yeah. There was a question by Florian, and I just want to pick it up because it's
It's a
relevant.
very interesting one.
Yeah, so he says, I'm curious, why didn't you do the ranking of the metrics in the interviews themselves?
Can I give an answer?
Sure.
This is best practice in market research. The interviews are qualitative. So if one person says, this is really important for me, it does not mean that all the people in the universe, the teachers, say that. So a ranking in a qualitative individual interview is relevant for this person, but is not relevant for the whole market. And that's why we have a clear objective of the qualitative interview is to collect. And we go for quantity on the one hand. So we go for many of these metrics. And on the other hand, we go for sharpness and precision in phrasing the metrics. But then we collect, and we have 200. These 200 needs then to go into the market, not 200, but let's say 50. And then we find out how many teachers, in this case, find a metric really important. And it's really real. If you have these 3 dots that you see now on the screen, and you have the number of 8, that means 80% of the teachers in this universe of 163 teachers said, this metric is extremely important for me. That's a fact. No? So it's very factual. And then you can extrapolate this to the market and say, with a certain significance, is valid for the whole market. 163 is quite good. Did that answer your question?
Yes, very well. Thanks a lot.
I think there is, I mean, the market research exists until dozens of years. There is some best practices, and somehow in the design thinking world and the agile world, we see some of these principles not applied, forgotten, and this is one. That's why I thought it's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Do you want to add, Jan?
No. I think that's perfectly fine. So there's one by Sergio, and I think we can get into this a little bit. So he said, how do you go from the 200 to the 50? That's a pain because you have to let go of things that you might think is relevant. The quick answer is there is a process behind this. So we have a way of selecting this within the team, where each of the team members does a rating and the selection. And that we also kind of have a sense of what was said often in the interviews themselves. And then you have a discussion. And then you have to make a decision. It's a decision that you make because it's in the end, it's trade-off decisions. You cannot put in 200 into a survey, but just 51. But there is a process behind it to select them.
And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay. So
yeah.
I think this is the result. Let's move one step further. So kind of what else is in there might be interesting to know as well.
Yeah, so we didn't want to reveal everything. We can't give all of the secrets away, but suffice to say that what was, again, super helpful was having kind of a map that says, okay, these different metrics kind of cluster up into themes, right? So that's another piece of this is like, there were a number of kind of metrics that kind of clustered up under interruptions, a number that clustered up around finding and organizing resources. And you can see that kind of in the scatter plot. You can see these little clusters. And there were some other analysis tools that we used as well to kind of further dig in here. But again, it's so helpful to have this really crisp, clear, and verified through data. We know that these are opportunity areas. We know that if we can solve these problems for teachers, we know that we'll be delivering enough value that they'll be willing to adopt our solution, which is what we're really after.
Perfect. So I just a quick follow. There was a quick follow-up question by Scott, and he was asking like how many or what's the biggest number of metrics that we'll put in, and basically the answer is as many as we can to stay under 15 minutes. to fill out the survey. So we try to do be around 15 minutes in total, because otherwise you have a lot of drop-offs. This was an online survey, so you lose a lot of people. Something between 40 and 60 is usually the number of metrics that we put in. So this gives you then very, very concretely, on a very concrete sense, as Anna said, what is it really that matters to teachers? And now that we have this, we can start answering our business questions, and really from a teacher perspective, and having real data to answer this, and have fact-based decisions, fact-based discussions. So what we did then is, here we go into the, I skipped the slide. Here we go into the pain matching. So answering the first question, which idea is really relevant? And pain matching basically means confronting two perspectives: the perspectives of the teachers, which are the pain points. So whatever is in that opportunity space, or in these 6 opportunity areas, we take from up to, kind of, that's the top perspective. And from left to right, you see the features. So the feature ideas, and you cross-reference them. So you look at each of the feature ideas that you have, and you ask yourself, do they pay into a pain point? Do they address a pain area? And that way you can prioritize features. So you can say, okay, there is a feature number 2 in this example, which addresses a lot of different pain points. So we should prioritize this. This sounds like it's a hero feature. There is, for example, a feature 1, which doesn't really address as many pain points, so we deprioritize it. So that is kind of the basic concept of pain matching, and we'll show in a minute how this is then actually done.
Yeah, and just to add on that, there's this note here about blind spots. And I think this was, for us, one of the most interesting outcomes of this entire thing, was that we had some pretty definite ideas going into this about what was important to teachers. And in fact, a lot of what we had done in the prototype was sort of oriented around this idea that we had going in. Turns out that those were not the things that were pain points for teachers. So I think, that having that insight and that knowledge and that confidence before we started building something is just incredibly valuable, because then we're not wasting time on things that we might think are important. We don't waste time on developing a product for ourselves, I guess, right? Like we now know, you know what, we don't have to worry about that. But we thought it was important. We were wrong. Let it go. We're moving on to the stuff that actually matters. So I think that's another huge value of this process as well.
Yeah. So here's just maybe just a glimpse of how that actually looks like. It's a workshop that we do together. We did with the team. I think in the end it was kind of 1.5 workshops to really finish this up, where we match features and pain areas. Unfortunately, we cannot show everything. So there's confidential. I mean, we're sharing a lot already. So, but that's basically how we did it. Okay. Oh, sorry. Do you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. It was kind of interesting. I think too, even the process we divided up into teams, and each team took a group and then rated these things. And then we switched teams. And so if you're on team 1, in the second round, you go over and you review the ratings that team 2 has done, and you go, yeah, I agree with that, or no, I'm going to throw a red card there and say that I'm not sure. So it was good that we had a little cross-pollination there, and we and I think it helped us avoid groupthink. Yeah.
So again, there's a systematic process behind this to really make sure that we're here on it, because here we're making decisions. We're starting to make decisions.
Eric has a question on, did we ask if they would pay for it, for these new capabilities, for these new features? The answer is no. The answer is no at this stage, but will be at the later stage, because at this stage we are solution free. So when you go, we are solution neutral. The customer does not see a solution, and the willingness to pay comes in when you see a solution. Say you see a concept or a prototype and say, are you willing to pay for this feature, for example? So that comes at the later stage. At this stage, it's the basic assumption that if a solution addresses a pain point, someone will see value in it and will pay for it. But it has to be answered later.
Yeah.
Can maybe deepen this discussion in the Q&A later.
Yeah. So an additional step, and we'll go into this a little bit more, is the second question. What about the value proposition? And I think, Anna, you had a pretty clear idea, at least initially.
Yeah, we thought it was all about helping teachers save time in planning their lessons. But really, a lot of that sort of went by the wayside. And really this notion of like one click, I got to get all the students' eyes to the front, eyes on the teacher, grab their attention. Which again is a shift in our way of thinking and incredibly valuable to have those insights before we start into the process of actually building something.
Yeah.
I would take over. This is huge. Save time when planning a lesson. That's a typical value proposition that we see a lot. One click, all eyes to the front. Is a totally different concept. It's much more inspiring. It's much more resonating. Why does it resonate? Because it directly links to the pain points that we found before. We see a lot of value propositions which are obvious. So they are obvious and frankly boring. They don't really click. And that's really the challenge, to go from here, the left to the right. And there are a lot of possibility. It is a creative process. This creative process is inspired by the pain points, and we would like to show in the next 2 slides how we guide the process. We work with a canvas, a value proposition canvas, that is a bit differently structured than the common canvases that you see. And it's really inspired by consumer goods marketing. I was working in consumer goods before, and it's basically almost like a sales story or a marketing story. Advertising, for example, works a bit with these elements. What does it show? It shows on the left side the customer or the user perspective, on the right side the company perspective. The customer perspective is, what are the goals? What do the customers try to achieve in a certain situation, in a certain context? Basically, that's the jobs that they try to achieve. And then the second one is, what are the pain points that the customers have? So it's a very simple story about what do you try to achieve and what's the problem that you have when you try to achieve this. In the center, there is the promise. The promise is a marketing claim or marketing promise that each product has to give, and especially if it's in an innovation, has to give a very strong, compelling promise. That links the company perspective or the product perspective. On the right side, you see what we call the reason to believe. Reason to believe is a marketing term, reason to believe, that basically backs up, supports the promise. And features, or especially these hero features that really pay into the promise, make the promise credible. So when I say, I promise to you for 1 click 40 eyes, that's a huge promise for a teacher. We know that. Now we have to deliver on this promise, and then we show the features that are plausibly and really tell you, yeah, it will work. And the last one is the desired action, the call for action, or a new habit. Very often, if it's in a more consumer goods world, it's more like building a new habit, replacing an old habit with a new one. So that's the company perspective. What do we want to achieve now? We want to achieve, for example, that teachers start to listen to our message and register on a website. So this is the theory. Interestingly, is when you follow the process, we've done the left side. We've got the jobs. We know them from the user, from the teachers. We know the pain points. We can work with these pain points. Then there comes a creative process with the promise. That's brainstorming. But we make sure that the promise really solves the pains. And then on the right-hand side, we have the hero features identified through the pane matching. So basically comes everything together in this value proposition. This creative process, Anna, we lived through this in several sessions. If you want to give a snapshot of how it worked.
Yeah, it was actually a lot of fun. Again, we took in teams to kind of, we had some kind of rough things like develop a lesson plan in the speed of light, or there was one I think about technology and disruption. So we had 3 or 4. We kind of broke up into teams. We kind of workshopped these ideas, and what you see in the bottom of this canvas are sticky notes that represent different pain points. And so we were kind of looking for what's a value proposition that covers kind of those big opportunity ones, right? Where you have a really important need that's underserved, right? You really kind of, how can we turn that into language that we think will appeal to our market? And we came out with, actually 3 that I think were pretty strong, but, this idea of like one click, get all eyes on me, for us resonates. There's still work to be done here, to be honest. I think we still, we have not yet gone back out to teachers to say, is this really the right one? So there is a little bit of work still left to be done. And of course, it's always, research is just self-propagating process. It's like you answer one question, now you have 5 more. So yeah, it was creative. It was fun. It was really interesting to see how it kind of developed.
Yeah. So, and then you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a process. Here we kind of have one of the key outcomes, I would say. But I mean, there was 3, I think it was 3 or 4 avenues, as you said, that we had, that we started out with. So there was a question in there in the chat, if we can talk a little bit more about the value proposition. So this is kind of one that we landed on. So I'll just quickly run through, like, it's already a story. It's already a story, and we very often then really transform it into a story when you say, okay, when you as a teacher deliver the lesson, interruptions occur. Students lose focus and attention. Once lost, it is so hard to get them back to refocus. We promise to you, so we Promethean in this case, we promise to you with one click in the software, you get all eyes to the front. And then why should I believe that as a teacher? How do you do this? With the new Promethean Attention Grabber Toolkit. So that is kind of a feature set that you can then show that really pay into this promise. So we have developed as Promethean different tools where you have one click and everybody looks to the front. Everybody looks to everybody in the class, or all the students look to the front. So this one click, all eyes to the front. So go to the website now and pre-register for the beta access, or whatever then the call to action really is. But this is basically the value proposition, and it already has a story format, which you can tell and also internally tell of what you want to develop.
And it has huge navigation power for the developers, for the team, because when you decide, and I don't know if it's decided already, the project just finished. When Promethean decides this is the positioning, this is the value proposition, you can imagine the power it has to align all the people behind it and say, we want to build a tool, one click, all eyes to the front. How does it have to be? What are the features we put in? And we have a set of features selected. Some of them are invented, by the way, new, Anna, which were not on the list. Some of them are renamed so that it pays into this one click, all eyes. And it really helps to guide the development and the innovation work.
Yeah, and I think it's a thing, we hear it from our developers actually all the time. Like, what's the vision? Like, what's the one thing that you need us to accomplish? Like, how are we going to know that we're successful? And then also, once we get this thing ready to go to market, we kind of already know how we're going to talk about it, what we're going to say, how we're going to position ourselves versus competitors. And we have the data to tell us that we can feel confident about going to market with this value proposition, and that's going to resonate.
Yeah, I remember this discussion also where you had a lot of this will be also trade-off decisions. You cannot develop everything. So how do you base your trade-off decision in fact, and really from a customer perspective? And that allows you to do this.
Yeah.
So that is it. Kind of two problems we started out with, so many ideas, and will they pay? Our answer is we found those 7 hero features that we can use in marketing, and but also of course, that we have to develop. And will they pay? So what's the value proposition? We landed on this one-click, all eyes to the front, which really is both from the customer perspective. Both of these answers are given in a fact-based way. So we didn't make this up. It's basically teachers who told us. They told us the metrics. They told us the job they want to do. They told us the importance rating. So you really have a fact-based decision, even before you started developing anything that's really serious. So really where you don't do much investment. So that's it. There is a couple of questions still left. We're running a minute late. So if you'll stay with us, we of course go to these questions and all the other questions that you want to have as well.
Just this will they pay question. This is half answered. We strongly believe that this one-click all eyes will work in the market and people will pay, but we don't have the proof for it. So what should come next is a concept test, for example, where you at least measure some readiness to pay, willingness to pay, and this gives the indication, are we on the right track? But this part is not yet done, and will be done in a later step, because it's a very important question to the business question.
Yeah, and it could be, honestly, we may go out and start testing this concept of, it could be, that we still need to tweak and adjust. So there's lots of questions in the chat.
We'll go to them. Before we do this, I would just want to say, Anna, thank you so much for doing this. It is not normal that we do this. It is so nice to always have somebody who is willing to share this and share information that usually so rarely gets shared and give insight into these projects. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Everybody that stayed on the call, thank you as well. I think we'll jump into some of those questions that there are there. Is that okay?